Hello, welcome back to Skyrocket Automotive and welcome back to Saturday Club, episode 3. Been a bit of a weird week here, a bit hectic, but nothing otherwise to really report. Got, I feel, something of an interesting video today. Just going to talk about distributors and ignition systems in general, why ignition timing is important. So basically, this is a old Beetle distributor, hence the weird shape. The one you're probably most used to seeing if you own a Rocco is one of these. This one is seized absolutely solid. This is out of Project Storms, the original Dizzy. And it is completely locked up. Like, might be quite funny to rebuild this, what do you reckon? See if we can get it working? Let me know in the comments. Okay, ignition systems are dead simple once you get your head around them. So it all starts with your coil. Your battery voltage comes in on the positive side and leaves via the negative side. And the negative side is actually what controls your coil. So the way a points ignition works is that negative lead goes to the points, which I'll explain in a hot minute. But let's just talk about what a coil does. You've got primary windings and secondary windings. Primary winding is low voltage. The secondary winding is a high tension circuit. Basically, while this is powered, there's a magnetic field builds up in the secondary windings and it's really starting to get agitated. And then when the ground's broken, it relaxes. And that causes your high voltage spark. Major voltage. It varies from ignition system to ignition system, but it's pokey. Don't lick it while it's running, put it that way. So, how do we get this to turn on and off? More importantly, how do we get this to turn on and off in time with the engine? Because there's no point in this just idly turning on and off. With points in the earliest format, and then a Hall effect sensor later, which I'll show you in a second. This is a points distributor, this is out of a Beetle. So those are your points just there, and you'll notice where the points are touching is a square. Obviously that's the number of cylinders in the engine, and as you rotate the distributor, you see the points opening and closing. So those lumps on the center of the distributor are called cams or lobes. People call them all manner of different stuff. As your distributor comes round to point at the spark plug lead it wants to fire to, that coincides with the lobe opening the points. Breaks the spark, coil fires down the king lead to the center of the distributor cap. The spark travels in there and it's such high tension from the coil, it's able to jump the gap between the rotor arm and the outlet on the distributor cap for whichever cylinder. So it can hop across and then it travels down your spark plug lead to your spark plug. That's pretty much it, believe it or not. I'll probably get into condensers in another video because I want to do a video about modern parts and they're a sticking point for me. So ignition timing, what's the deal with that? As the piston comes up, you want the flame to start before the piston's at the very top of its travel, because then as it comes back down, it's a more efficient burn. You can't have too much advance, obviously, or it will start trying to blow the piston back the wrong way. And that's when you get pinking, knocking, dieseling, whatever you want to call it. Different distributors work in different ways in this regard. So there are some distributors, this one, for example, I would love to show you, but it's seized solid. Let's go to the bench. That's better. Right, we can see a bit more clearly now. How do we get ignition advance? Because currently all we've got is a spinning distributor. So the first thing I should say is that your advance curve needs to vary depending on the revs of the engine to get the best burn and make the most power. And it's different for every engine, which is why I'm not giving specifics. Where's my vacuum hose? There it is. This is a vacuum actuator. Same as you'd get on a Peerberg, but fitted to a distributor basically. Engine vacuum sucks on this port via the carburetor normally. As the vacuum depression collapses the bellows in this side, it pulls on this arm here. Now, what's that actually achieving, you might ask? And it's a fair question, because currently all I've just shown you is a doohickey dilly-dallying in a bingle. And that's not any help to anyone, is it? Let's put our rotor arm back on, hopefully clarify this a bit more. So what is actually moving is the base plate that the points mount to. Now, it's important to remember which direction distributors rotate, okay? So as this is coming around, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3. So I could do that all day, it's very satisfying. So we're at base timing currently, so that is, oh, I actually said 1 in the right place as well. That's what that notch is there is for. So cylinder 1, 4, 3, 2. What we want to do is have the burn start earlier. The faster the engine travels, the more important it is to advance our timing, because everything's happening so quickly, you need to make sure you get the most efficient burn possible. So you need to start the burn, lower down the barrel as the piston's coming up. If this is rotating clockwise, what's happening is we're actually pulling the points round So they hit the cam lobe earlier. So the point's open sooner, which triggers our coil sooner, which means our spark happens sooner, and we get our spark start. So at the moment, our spark happens about here. If we advance things, it happens there. And that is enough to give us ignition advance. That's enough for us to actually over-egg it. If we then set our base time into advanced, that's enough for actually us to over-egg it and get knock. Now, points ignition is mechanical, there's no computers involved, there's no thinking involved. What about electronic ignition? Now, again, I'm not against electronic ignition. My favorite cars in the world, Scirocco's, have electronic ignition. It's just they did it properly. There are a lot of really crap electronic ignition kits out there. You'll notice there's no points in here because what we have instead is this little guy. This is called a Hall effect sensor and it works in tandem with this guy. It's sniffing for a magnetic field. And how do we control that? With that. 4 notches for 4 cylinders. So if you picture this as being your points, look at this as being the lobes on the distributor. So to put them side by side, you immediately can see the similarities. There's your thing that senses when it's time to fire the ignition coil. There's your thing that senses when it's time to fire the ignition coil. There are your 4 lobes that control that. And there are your 4 lobes that control that. Just a different take on the same idea, basically. So as the distributor rotates on this one, it blinds the sensor to the magnetic field and then exposes it, and then blinds it and exposes it. Or closed, opened, closed, opened. That's literally it. Your advance works the same way. So what we're doing there is exactly the same as moving the points around. We're moving the sensor around to be able to view this window sooner. When we view the window sooner, the sensor picks up the signal sooner, the spark happens sooner, the timing's advanced. Slightly different on this because that Hall effect sensor needs power. So we've got a positive, negative, and an O. From memory, bear with me, as you can imagine, it's a lot of stuff to try and remember when you're talking to a camera. I think the positive and negative power the sensor, the 0 volt, is what does the switching, if I remember rightly. It's a weird design thing with this. As technology improves, things tend to get more complicated. But in this regard, actually, when you think about it, the more advanced system is actually the simpler one because there's moving parts in here, but not in here. That needs something to obviously decide what that information means. So let me go and get that. There's not much to look at, but just so I've covered it. This little beauty, believe it or not, controls all of that. It takes various signals from things and the transistor in there interprets what this is telling it and turns it on and off. But ultimately, all of that just turns your coil on and off. This video is to help people learn. If you know this information, bully for you. But not everybody knows this stuff. So just chill, okay? So, how do we look at what the ignition timing is doing? Well, it's actually fairly straightforward. This is a timing light. This is a beautiful old timing light. This is a Gunson Super Strobe, and it's one of my very favourite tools. We've got our leads, so that plugs in. Positive, negative. That powers a strobe light, literally like the ones that you get at discos. Does anybody still go to discos anymore? How's this triggered? With a thing called an inductive pickup. Now, again, engineers, people who invent stuff, like to call stuff really complicated names, but when you break it down, it's very simple. Obviously, there's an awful lot of lightning firing its way down here. As it moves past, it creates a disturbance in the force, if you will, okay? There's no point in giving you the science on it because it doesn't fix cars. This goes around a HT lead, which sounds odd if it's a concept that you've not heard of before, but basically the lead goes in through there on number 1 cylinder, and I'll explain why in a moment. Now, when that coil fires, there's a lot of energy in here, which obviously, even through the insulation, when this is wrapped around that lead, it will detect the pulse, just enough to trigger the strobe light, turn the strobe light on and off when nothing's happening, and on and off. And what it does, I tried filming this process. For some reason, the frame rate on my camera won't pick it up. It dilly-dallies and makes everything very confusing. So I'll just explain statically, and I'm not in the mood to listen to this thing run today anyway. Okay, so this is our timing mark. And on Beetles, you have to go with the joint in the middle of the engine casing. But there's our timing mark, okay? So what we do is we connect to the number one lead. You got to think that this is whirly-whirling at 850 RPM at idle and up from there. That strobe light fires so quickly on and off that you only see the moment that number one is firing. So you've got your timing mark, which is your yellow dot on your flywheel, and say it's here and top dead center's here, and you want to get it to there. You undo the clamp on your distributor and move it. And that's how you set your base ignition timing. All you got to do, I'm not even going to tell you which way to turn it because it's self-evident. You'll be able to see yourself. As you rotate the distributor, because that light is only coming on and off when number one's firing, you'll watch your timing mark. It will literally, it's quite trippy the first time you do it, you'll watch the mark move. And as you turn your distributor, you can actually set it to where it's supposed to be. Now, I would recommend you use the timing light you've got. There's no judgment here. If you've got one that doesn't have adjustable advance, then you have to do a little bit of extra work. I personally tune by ear. I only ever use this for fault finding. The last tune I do by ear and by feel. I take it out and drive it, make tweaks. Most timing lights now come with the feature on this that was quite a cocky selling point when this thing was new because it's quite old. But this is adjustable advance. Now, why is that handy? Because not all crank pulleys or flywheels, wherever you're getting your timing reference from, not all of them have got a mark for the ideal ignition timing from the factory. Or it's hard to see, hard to find, someone's machined the pulley to make it look pretty, whatever it is. They're normally not as pronounced as the top dead center mark because that's the most important one for timing up the engine, like the basic guts of the engine. What you can do with this is dial in the correct ignition timing. So all engines have a spec. Most often, from the sort of 70s on, British stuff, we did this weird thing where we had things after top dead center, but most stuff has a base ignition timing just before top dead center normally. If you can't find that mark or it's not there, all you do, you mark your top dead center point, and then if you've got an adjustable ignition advance, you dial it in, say you need 10 degrees of advance before top dead center, and that will actually change when this fires to fire the light as though it was happening at your set ignition advance. So it would fire at 10 degrees before top dead center. Now when that happens, say you've got an engine that's at top dead center, 0, right? You've lined everything up. If you adjust this knob, as you adjust it, you'll watch the timing mark wander. And then when you get to your ideal advance position on the back of the dial, 10 degrees, you can then adjust your distributor to line the marks back up, and you've just set the ideal timing. So these are very useful for fault finding. I would always recommend, within reason, that you tune an old engine by ear and feel. Some engines want more advance initially, so that they're ready to rock when you rev them and you can get rid of your flat spot. If the engine isn't pinking, if the engine's not under any stress, if it makes good power and is getting good fuel economy and the emissions are correct, who cares? It runs well. That's how the engine wants to run. Let it. If everything's okay, that's the definition of an old school tune-up. Why am I kneeling down here to do this? So why did I just show you what a timing light is and how to use one, only to then tell you to disregard it? I'm not telling you to disregard it. I hope that hasn't come across that way. What I'm saying is it's a good way to get you started, but old cars have wear in them. So I've got a manual here. This is for a MG Metro. Cool little car. Right, what's the ignition timing? A HLE 998cc from 1980, 8 degrees before top dead center, plus or minus 2 degrees. So already it can either be 6 or 10 and still be considered to be within spec. Specs were just made up by a dude. I cannot emphasize this enough. They came up with the specs that they came up with to get the vehicles built quickly so that everybody knew roughly where things had to be. They didn't know what fuel you were going to be using it on, the quality or whether it was the correct fuel or not, because customers are stupid and they put the wrong fuel in sometimes. It needs to pass emissions tests, get a certain degree of fuel economy, and they basically worked out a number that allows them to do that every single time on a brand new engine. It also allows the dealers to have a spec to work to when they're still within their service regimen. And how long does that go on for? 3 years back then? Now, the newest vehicle that this manual applies to is May of 1990. The last I checked, that was 34 years ago. It was. 34 years is a long time. Quality of oil changes, that's a lot of oil changes to miss, and people miss them all the time. Things change, engines wear, and they all wear differently. Some cars get driven to the Alps every 6 months. Some cars potter to their local Sainsbury's and back for their entire life, and everywhere in between. They all get driven differently, some get thrashed, some never get taken over 2,000 RPM. Engines wear in differently, and at the point where an engine becomes an older engine, like me, I need a coffee in the morning, and it takes me 5-10 minutes longer to get going in the morning than I used to 5 years ago because I've destroyed my body working on cars. You have to make allowances. So I would say, take the spec. If you're trying to get an engine to run, always use the spec, or as a rough guide. If the ignition timing's miles out, that might be why it's not starting. So put it to where it's meant to be, and you can rule it out for a minute and look elsewhere. It's just one less thing to think about. But once the engine starts, see what it needs. If it's got a dirty great bog as you feed into the throttle because the engine's got wear in it, it's not pulling on that vacuum advance correctly, just give it a little bit more advance at idle. Prepare the engine ready for it, you compensate for it. That's what a tune-up is. You're dialing that particular engine in. These were all a standard for mass production vehicles, like retail. They just need to be able to work within a tolerance. But when you get your car, you're allowed to finesse it. People are always on at me. What's the ignition timing? I don't know. I think about 15. It's meant to be 8. Yeah, it was when the car was brand new. You brought it to me because it runs like a dog when you try and pull away. So I gave it some more advance and now it drives like its ass is on fire. It's fixed. It's not set correctly. No, it isn't set correctly, according to a manual. So you've got two options: complete engine rebuild and maybe it will pull enough vacuum to be able to operate that advance curve, or you just pre-prepare the engine and then turn the idle speed down gently. What I'm saying is, timing lights are a tool, okay? But they are far better utilised starting you off, and then what I use them for mostly is record keeping. So I will set a distributor, test drive the car, listen to it, whatever I need to do. Right, that's nice. What's that? Timing light on it. Okay, brilliant. And I'll write it down somewhere. And then I'll monkey about with it just a little more. Tuning's fun. You want to try and wring out as much power as you can without hurting the engine. And on standard stuff, that's really easy to do. It is so easy to take a car that should make 112 horsepower, again, factory number, that's been tuned badly, normally, with the specs from the book, it's been tuned badly and it's only making 80 horsepower, and then you wake it up by helping it out, giving it what it needs, and all of a sudden it makes 112 horsepower again. There ain't no feeling in the world like finding 32 horsepower with a simple tune-up, and I've done it multiple times. It's the best feeling ever. I think it's my second favourite thing short of starting an engine that hasn't run in a long time. So with Moss, with the car throttle 924, I did exactly that. I wrote it on the underside of the bonnet. It's probably still there. When we were tweaking after we put the supercharger on, set the ignition time in, we test drive it. No, it's flat. Okay, no worries, disregard that. Set the distributor, tweak the kjet, back and forth, get it balanced so it feels nice. Try that. Whoa, that's better. Nice one. Get a timing light on it. What's the ignition time in there? 12. Just on the underside of the bonnet. And then we dick around with it again, and that's exactly how that happened with Moss. When we were at the dyno, I was tuning all of that by ear, but I was using my timing light to check where we were at as we went, just so I could keep a record of it. It was written in Sharpie. I don't know if it's still on the underside of that bonnet. I would like to finish that car, actually. Get it to where the boys planned it to be. We were so close. It was just going lean in the very top end. So I did a calculation, because you can do a calculation for horsepower based on peak torque. And I did the calculation. We would have done it. The plan was, with that supercharger kit, because it made woefully small amounts of horsepower, can we double the horsepower? And if it had been able to rev round to the same as it did when they first took it there, without going lean, because obviously we didn't want to melt a piston, yes, it would have. It would have made 139.8 horsepower, I think, which is pretty much dead nuts on, versus the 70 it made. Anyway, I'm rambling on at you now. What I'm saying is, you're going to come across, if you're getting into classic cars, you're going to come across a lot of know-it-alls, a lot of cocky people that deal in absolutes and black and white. And the reason I love classic cars is they're so very, very colourful. No two classics are the same. I've got 4 Scirocco's in there at the moment, and every single one of them needs to be tuned differently. That's wicked to me. Some of which left the factory within 6 months of each other. They scattered to the wind all those years ago, and now they've reconvened and they've all had their different lives and their different knocks, and some have been put on a little cushion and walked around everywhere. Others have been thrashed around Eastern Europe. And ultimately, when all said and done, no two classic cars are the same. So if anybody ever tells you absolutes for things, pretty safe to say you can stop listening to them somewhere around the middle of the first sentence once you've ascertained that. I hope this has been a confidence builder. You can do all of this. This is all tangible, and I really hope you find these videos helpful or interesting. If you didn't, sorry, maybe we'll get you on the next one. If you did enjoy this, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Things are picking up. It's nice. The algorithm's not really trying, but I don't really care as long as you... I've got some regulars that mean the absolute world to me. It's so cool that people regularly tune in. They always leave a comment. It's becoming quite a nice little community, actually. And I spoke to someone the other day about the potential for t-shirt designs, so that could be cool. I'm going to go and enjoy the rest of my weekend, edit this video and put it up on YouTube. I'll see you guys later. Ta-ra!